tree today. Can you see this one? The umbrella tree?
Yeah, I can see your umbrella tree. I hope that doesn't grow too tall.
Oh, look, I have, my house is a jungle too, so I'll just cycle it through if it gets too big out here.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, it looks really good. I really like it. Yeah, I think you should be styling for Better Homes and Gardens. What do you think?
Oh, I think that is possibly a job I'm not at all qualified or suited to.
Well, I can't do your job, so that's fair enough too.
Let's all stay in our lanes.
Okay. Wow, people are starting to join us, and I was pretty soon we're going to hear where they're all coming from now. Wow. Yeah. Can't wait till they do. That way.
Don't be strangers, or we'll just be sitting here wondering where you all are tonight. Let us know.
They'll be there. Here they go. Oh, hi.
Oh, Whit Sunday, Geelong. Oh, now I've got jealousy though. This was a terrible idea.
No, it's great. They're coming from Perth, Wodonga, everywhere. Oh, this is fantastic. Okay, well, welcome to everyone who's joined us already. Thank you so much for joining us on our Zoom Books and Bubbles event. We're live streaming as well, so very warm welcome to everybody there. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dora Paffis. I'm the editor of Better Homes and Gardens magazine, and I'm absolutely thrilled to bring you this event in partnership with Hachette and QBD. And of course, to introduce you to the very talented Kelly Rimmer, the author of The German Wife. Now, just before we start asking Kelly some questions, a little bit of housekeeping. I'm just going to read this so I don't get it wrong. Kelly's book can be purchased from our event partner QBD, and if you do that, you'll go into the draw to win a gourmet food hamper from the Hamper Emporium. It's actually valued at $249, and you'll find the link in the chat. I want to know whether I'm allowed to enter that or whether I'm excluded because I'm interviewing you.
Enter? That sounds great.
I know. Would be good, wouldn't it? Anyway, so the other thing I wanted to say is if you have any questions for Kelly, please enter them in the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your screen, or leave a comment and via Facebook, and we'll endeavour to ask the questions of Kelly. So welcome, Kelly. How are you?
It's really great to chat to you tonight, Dora.
It's going to be a fantastic. Oh my goodness, I'm just going to have to read some of the things that people are saying. Anne saying this is the best book this year.
And thank you, Anne.
And I have to say, I have to agree with her. I took a weekend out and it was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I read it from cover to cover in a weekend with time out for my favorite pastime, which is eating and sleeping. Okay. We've got Helen as well from Melbourne. We've got people from Canberra, Ipswich. Oh my goodness, people sort of coming in from everywhere. Kelly, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Where did the idea for this book actually germinate from?
Yes, well, it was July 2019, and it was the 50th anniversary of the moon landing. And I live near Orange in the Central West. And one of my friends said, let's go to Parks. The Radio Telescope was holding a festival. So off we went to Parks, and I was not looking for a new book idea, but I never am when they find me. So I was wandering through the exhibits, and there was an exhibit there about the history of the US space program. And it mentioned that German scientists and US scientists worked together in Huntsville from 1950. And that seemed incredibly improbable to me, knowing, what I know about World War II and how fierce the animosity between these two countries was. So I started researching in the car on the way home. And, before long, I'd discovered Operation Paperclip, and a book idea had kind of formed. So that was it.
Wow. And I understand you're an exhaustive researcher because the book covers off, the Great Depression, it covers the war, covers Operation Paperclip, mental health, a whole host of subjects. So tell me what that process is like for you.
It's incredibly inefficient. I am not, I'm productive, obviously, like I managed to write my books, but they take me much longer than they otherwise would because I'm driven by curiosity. I start researching, and I want to understand context as well as the detail that makes it into the book. So I'm researching around these subjects. And in this case, I really made my own life very difficult because it is like 3 books in one. I had to research enough about, the Dust Bowl years in the US to be able to write that portion of the book, and then the Huntsville years, and of course the part of the book that's set in Germany. So this was probably the most challenging book that I've written, I think, in terms of both the research and the structure. So it was not easy.
I think reading this book, what I took out of it is I learned things that I had no idea about. I had never heard about the Dust Bowl in America, and what that actually, when you combine that with the Great Depression, etc. I mean, what that actually meant for people. So that was wonderful, because history, I was a big modern history buff. So I was really drawn to all that information, that extra information that was in the book. It just gave it so much more context. I loved it. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Historically, when we've thought about Germans and Germany, they're thought of in as the baddies, shall we say. They're very negative. But you went out of your way when you were writing this book to be more nuanced, and you were looking at the German people and how this situation actually arose. And you gave, I won't say their side of the story, but just how this whole episode just took off. I can't call it an episode. It's not an episode, but you know what I'm saying. So, and it's almost like people's inactions almost allowed it to happen as much as Hitler's brainwashing of the populace.
Yeah, I quite deliberately wanted to do that, and it's certainly, I certainly have hopefully gone to enough thought and effort to make sure I'm not excusing any of the decisions the characters make. But it was a case of people sometimes say, when you talk about World War II, well, that would never happen here. And of course, people might have said that about Germany once upon a time too. And so I wanted to show the evolution of how a polite society gave way to chaos. And in the book, I kind of start in 1930 with this really casual conversation between these German women. And one of them is Jewish, and she gets up to go to the bathroom, and there's just this hint of anti-Semitism. And I did that on purpose, because any one of us might hear a conversation like that on any ordinary day and not say anything because it's awkward. And the comment that this woman makes is so casual. And my character actually thinks, well, no harm's really done by it. But that undercurrent of anti-Semitism is so ugly. And over time, it grows and grows and grows. And it takes one mad ideologue, and next thing you know, you've got this increasing whirlwind of hatred that leads to the Holocaust. But it doesn't start at Auschwitz. It starts way back before then. So I've tried to paint a nuanced picture of people there are very bad people in my book. They're not all people who are victims of circumstance, but some of my characters are caught up in a country gone mad. And I really hope readers are reading it thinking, what would I do if things started going that way here?
And sometimes we as human beings like to take the line of least resistance just to keep the peace. And then suddenly we're caught up in this situation that, certainly it was the most horrific time in the world. And we see it happening over and over and over again. I've got some questions here. So the first one is from Jody. If the idea germinated in 2019, how much of your research was affected by the difficulties of COVID?
Yes, lots. In some ways, we're lucky that the pandemic happened when it did, even in my job, because once upon a time, I don't think I could have researched a book like this without going to, I would have loved to have gone to Germany and to the US to research this book. And at any other time, I probably could have, but in this case, I just couldn't. So I was able to access information and primary sources from Australia, where it's, the internet has revolutionized so many things, including historical novels. novels. So for me, it's a case of I really like to listen to oral histories if I can access them. And I really love to look at photographs, because from a photograph, I can learn about, expressions on people's faces and body language and what's in the background and what clothes they're wearing. And in the information age, you can get books and you can, find libraries online, and there's all kinds of resources that I could access. So it wasn't a showstopper, but my very exciting research trip that I might have otherwise had did not happen.
Yeah, pity about that, but yes, it doesn't show in the book.
Oh, thank you.
Sophie asks, did you connect with your characters in a way, or did some of them challenge you and make you dislike them in the end?
Oh, that's a really good question. I always want to have moments when I'm writing where I don't like my characters. I think there's a real trend in kind of this modern era to have books where all the characters are so likable and they can feel unreal. Everyone is unlikable at some point in time. So I'm always looking for my characters to annoy me or to frustrate me. And in this case, particularly writing Sophie, my character Sophie, is a woman living in Germany making decisions on what she knows day to day. And I know where it's headed. So I'm thinking, don't do that. But she doesn't know. So that was actually part of the struggle of the book, is trying to write this German woman who is blindly walking through life, making decisions that feel small, but my readers and I know exactly where, her country and where her family even are headed. So there were times when they were both incredibly frustrating characters to write, but I like it that way.
I actually don't know what this says about me, but I really empathized with her. There was I just empathized with the dilemma that she faced all the way through, because I think as human beings, we don't always get it right. Anyway, I can get on to Lizzie a little bit later and what my impressions of Lizzie were. But Debbie asks, I look forward to reading more about the Dust Bowl in this novel. I learned about it last year after reading Kirsten Hanna's book, The Four Winds. Have you read that one, Kelly?
I didn't dare read it. I was writing this book when it came out, and I deliberately stay away from any fiction that is set anywhere near what my current book that I'm working on is, because you don't want to accidentally learn a fact from a book that isn't correct. Like we as novelists, we take liberties and we get small details wrong. She wouldn't get anything wrong because she's amazing, but she might change a date or something. And you never want data to go in your head that's not actually from the right source. So yep. I put it aside until I'd finished, and then I read it, and it was beautiful because she is incredibly gifted.
I think it must be Simone, sorry. So emotionally intelligent, Sophie, caring for your reader. How much does your editor play a role, structurally or line edit?
Editors are geniuses, and mine is no exception. It is such a unique skill set. If someone said to me, you need to find a new career, you'll have to become an editor, I would lose my job on day one, because it is such a unique way of looking at story. And I can't do it. I'm so blind when I am writing my drafts. It really is a case of like the editor comes in and I can't see the forest for the trees, and my editors are really great at helping me figure out this isn't working, or maybe this isn't working. And I overwrite much like I speak. It's too many words. And so without the editorial team that I have helping me get the word count down to a level that is acceptable and, functional and useful, my books would be like this big and no one would ever want to publish them. So I'm so lucky. I've got great editors. But, at the end of the day, the story's mine and any errors are mine. And if it's not working, it's all on me, but I couldn't do it without them.
No, I certainly can attest to that. Like you, I always overwrite. The artists hate me. They're going, Dora. And our chief sub, who I believe interviewed you
yes,
for the magazine, the lovely Lisa.
She was lovely.
She was lovely, and she's my savior too. So I know exactly what you mean. So sorry. Bianca is asking, Kelly, your vivid rendering of history is so resonant and moving, though Ultimately, these were horrific and traumatic circumstances. How did you safeguard yourself and your mental health in the writing and researching process? Any tips for aspiring historical writers? Absolutely adored your book and hope to meet you next time in Brisbane.
Oh, I hope so too. I was going to meet you a few weeks ago, but didn't happen, unfortunately. I have to say, safeguarding of the writer's mental health is a lot easier when you're not in a pandemic. So I think what I've learned from that is that when you're delving into heavy history, it's much easier to do that when your own life is really simple. That's not something we can control, though, is it? So I think it is a case of balance. I have other hobbies that I'm trying. This is my favorite thing to do. So I am kind of prone to just spending too much time in the research or too much time in the book and then and not taking a break from the material. But I think that it is about forcing yourself to have other things that aren't related to it, that you can go and give yourself a mental break from it, because some of it is, if you're writing about World War II or actually much of modern history, there is stuff in there that really can be quite traumatizing, even as a secondhand witness, as a writer. And if you want to really vividly render the scenes, you need to put yourself in it and then daydream about it and imagine it and think about it a lot. So it can be taxing, but I do think it is about finding balance.
How long did that whole process take you to write this particular book?
Look, I think it'd be a bit over a year. It kind of crosses over because I tend to do a book a year. So I've got one that's kind of, being edited, and I'm working a draft of another. And then there's different kind of levels of research. There's kind of pre-research where you're trying to get an idea of the big events and the key milestones that are going to shape the story. And then there's that fine research where you're really trying to craft the scene. So it's pretty hard to assess exactly the time frame.
But about a year is roughly.
Yeah.
Sophie's asking, how did you find out about the listening devices? Where were they in the houses? I was so interested in that part of the story. I had nightmares multiple times of neighbours calling the Gestapo on me. Did I say that was from Sophie? Sophie asked that question.
I'm sorry, Sophie. I read about this actual listening device that was used, one specific device called the Bug, which was a little passive listening device that was used after the war by the Soviets against the Americans. And that really captured my interest. I was thinking, I'd love to find a way to include something like that in the story, because, of course, the fact of the matter was the Gestapo was not a huge organization. It felt omniscient and it felt omnipresent, but it was much, 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 tiny, like only a few thousand people even in Berlin. And so it felt to the people of Berlin like they were everywhere, and like every secret thought somehow could be found out. So I wanted to find a way to capture that sense of menace that existed. And there were rumors in some of the first-hand accounts that I read of tiny listening devices, which of course seems so improbable through the war years, especially, that technology. It's not like now where like I'm actually speaking to you through a tiny listening device. We're so accepting of that technology, but it was very different obviously in the 40s and 30s. So I had kind of stolen in my head the picture of the Bug, and I had it hidden. I mean, I don't know, it's not really a spoiler alert because I don't reveal it in the book, but I had it hidden in Jürgen's study for the purposes of my own thinking. But to Jürgen and Sophie, it feels like they're everywhere. It feels like the Gestapo can hear them even in their private conversations. And whether or not they were actual listening devices or the block warden sitting at the window listening, or someone in the next room listening, I mean, the pressure and the incentive and the control the Nazis had over the population. So people were really incentivized to dob in a neighbor or a child or a parent or, beloved family member. And so the device itself actually, in the end, wasn't that important. It was actually the menace that I really wanted to get across.
I was going to say, what kind of research did you do to work out that people couldn't hear you, or the device couldn't hear you if you was whispering under a blanket?
Well, yes, the actual device. So the one that I had kind of modeled it on was hidden in this great big wooden, like a piece of art that was gifted. And so I imagined that it would quite well pick up the speech in that room, because my characters don't know where it is. So they have to assume it's everywhere. And so they find these clever ways to kind of try and have secret conversations, or, as clever as they can be. So they're having conversations in parks where they're whispering, and they're having conversations in the bathroom with the water running and hiding under the blankets. I really love the symbology of that, of a married couple just wanting some privacy. And where else are they going to get it but underneath the blankets at night, whispering to one another?
I think it's Kesha. How did you research Germany in the 30s? I really enjoyed how you showed how gradual the changes were that allowed the Nazis to come to power.
Yes, lots of books and oral histories. So it really was a really slow erosion of rights. Hundreds of those decrees that I have detail over a few chapters in the books, where the Nazis came to power, and then gradually there's this just whittling away of the rights of the Jews in society over this quite short period of time, but at the same time it's quite slow, in when you look at it. Didn't happen overnight. And so it was a case of just, again, going back to all those sources and trying to paint a picture of the world's changing. It's changing fast enough that my characters are aware of it, but slow enough that every new decree is so narrow, there's not really that much anyone can do about it.
Simone's asking what magazine, and I'm assuming she means Better Homes and Gardens, when I spoke about Lisa Chant, who wrote the interview for Better Homes and Gardens. So Simone, that's it. Go out and buy one now. That's my plug for the magazine. Ike is asking, what are your other hobbies?
I live on acreage, so I have a garden, and I have 2 goats that take up a really ridiculous amount of my time, and some chickens and dogs and cats and children and, friends and drinking coffee and all of that good stuff. But just in the last few years, especially over the course of the pandemic, I've really, really become quite a nature person. I love to go for a hike. I love to go outside and dig in the dirt. And I wasn't like that before, but it's really been a lifesaver over the last few years.
Sounds idyllic. I like the chickens and the goat. I'm just going to check the name here so I don't get it wrong. Catherine, can you talk us through a normal work day for you when you're writing?
I'm not really a very consistent writer. It's really funny. I have different phases. If I'm researching, I might just read all day. If I'm walking, I might be listening to oral histories as I walk, I find them in a format where I can do that. Or I dictate. So when this microphone isn't doing Zooms, it does my dictating. So I might dictate great big, thousands of words, or I might be editing. It does vary day to day.
Sophie's asking, did you do any research about how the children would have coped after the war was over? I feel like those who grew up and went to the school would have really struggled when they realized all the propaganda was wrong. Actually, I might just add something there. Did they actually realize that the propaganda was wrong, or were they just, the war was over and Germany was seen as the bad guys? Did they actually realize the propaganda was wrong?
There was this really determined effort to denazify the German population by the Allies after the war. And that was definitely effective in many cases. People were forced to confront. Germany has never shied away from its history. That people were forced to confront what had happened in their name, in their own country. But these children had grown up in an environment where they were literally brainwashed from birth, many of them, at school, at home, at Hitler Youth. There was just this endless barrage of this hatred. And so there was certainly some people for whom, the rug was pulled out from under these kids. They had seen themselves right up to the end of the war. They were told they were going to win it. And of course, that wasn't the case. Many of them would have had no idea about the camps or what was really going on. And so then all of a sudden the war's over. They've lost. Hitler's a fraud. He's dead. He's at his own hand, a coward who wouldn't even face the consequences of his own actions. These kids would have floundered. And so I won't give away any spoilers, but I've tried to show some of that through the way the book resolves.
How much time is spent research as opposed to writing the novel? I feel guilty for binge reading in 2 days when it takes so long to write.
Don't feel guilty about that. That's the ultimate compliment.
Yes.
I don't think any novelist will complain if you read the book really fast, because I mean, it says something really nice about how engrossed you are in the story. It does. I think I probably spend more time researching than I do writing. If I really was able to somehow add it up end to end, I think because it is a case of where you want to paint a vivid picture, you have to understand so much more than you're going to include in the book. And it's about, the big picture items are that's just general reading when I'm kind of planning out how the plot might go. But then when I'm writing individual scenes, I mean, I'm trying to figure out what kind of car these characters would be driving and what colors would the car be, what clothes would they be wearing. I have no interest in fashion. I can barely dress myself. I have no clue about historical fashion. So I'm looking at photos. What on earth is this thing called? And then I'm trying to figure out, how to describe. At one point, I have a friend who she's a seamstress, and she's got quite a good understanding of what clothes are and how they work. And I sent her a picture, and I was like, what on earth is this? I know it's a dress. Like, how do I describe this lapel thing? And so, that detail, a fine detail that I'm probably initially giving you too much of, and then my editor's helping me get it right. I don't know, though, what's coming in and out. I'm just writing it all down. So the research for that stuff does take a really long time. But don't feel bad. Just thank you for reading it quickly.
And it is easier to write more and cut as opposed to have to pad, isn't it?
Absolutely. I've never had that problem, but I imagine you're right. And sometimes I do think I used to really struggle with it. I used to think there has to be a better way to do this. I mean, if I'm writing 1,000 words and out of every 1,000 words, only 700 are making it into the book or something, there has to be a better way to do it. But it is about context. So much is about, there's one scene in this book that I think I probably overwrote, like it was probably double what it ended up being in the final version. And when I looked back at that after I'd paired everything out that didn't need to be there, I really knew what I was trying to say.
Yes.
But so it just is the way that my process works. I don't recommend it if you're choosing a process, but
no, I think you're absolutely right. It does help to understand what it is you're actually trying to say. And so it is better to have the whole picture, and then you can drill down to the essence. And yes, you did that very successfully, because I didn't feel we missed out on anything.
Thank you.
Karen is asking, where did your interest in Europe come from, in war in Europe come from?
Yes, so this was a bit of an accident, Karen, because my grandparents were Polish Catholics, my maternal grandparents, and they died when I was quite young. So they were the kind of people who came to Australia, and then kind of there was like act 2 of their lives, and didn't really bring any history with them in the sense that they wouldn't talk about it. And so I was pregnant with my own son, and at a Christmas party, and with all of my cousins and my aunts and uncles, and thinking, we are such a weird, diverse bunch. And there's now more than 50 direct descendants of that one couple. We have nothing in common except that we're Australian. How on earth did we end up here? And that led to my earlier book, The Things We Cannot Say, that question, which kind of was inspired by me wishing I could ask them questions and not having any way to really know what they went through. And so I kind of fictionalized a story in my head that might have happened to them. And from there, I don't know, I just caught the history bug. I never actually intended to write historical fiction. It just kind of, I was writing about people that happened to be in an earlier era, and now I've written several books like that. So yeah.
Just checking who this is. It's Simone. You mentioned, it's Ike. And where would you recommend finding oral histories? Simply Google?
Depends on what kind of oral history you're looking for, Ike. There's some great online libraries that you can find them in, particularly around World War II. It's actually not that difficult to find oral histories of people who survived World War II, particularly the Jewish experience. One book that I was researching, there was this particular narrow topic that I wanted to listen to some stories on, and I found hundreds of hours of a podcast that was specifically about recording oral histories about that particular subject. So it really does depend. Every time I start a new book, I'm looking for a narrow kind of subset of oral histories, and there are many different resources now. And online is a good resource. I guess if you're looking for something in particular, Google's probably a good place to start, but also librarians are wizards. So if you get stuck, find a librarian and ask them and they'll help you.
Simone's saying, how does nature inform your writing? And then
that's a good
landscape.
question. Yeah, it's about, I actually have this great big window over here when I'm writing at this desk, and there's trees out there. And it's not like I'm specifically writing about trees, but there's something about just watching nature and just being still. I think that and even just that sensory experience of disconnecting from whatever your work happens to be, in my case the story, and just being the smells and the textures and the moist earth as I'm gardening, or the dogs as I'm walking the dogs. There's something about that I think is very refreshing. So although you won't find lots of passages about trees in my books, it's more that it's about, I guess, a soul thing or a spirit thing.
Sophie's saying, sorry, I keep asking so many questions. What do you think happened to Laura?
Oh, I don't know if I can tell you without giving away a spoiler. That's a good question, though. I think Laura probably stays on the trajectory that she is on at the end of the book.
And Simone's saying, haha, you are too funny, Kelly. Would love to meet you. but what character lines to follow? Then we have an anonymous attendee. Must be shy. The German Wife is the first book of yours I've read, and it touched me deeply. I've seen you have written more books based around World War II. Which one would you recommend, in your personal opinion, to read next?
I think The Things We Cannot Say is a good one, because it ties into my book, The Warsaw Orphan, and you could read them in any order, but if you are going to read them both, I'd probably start with The Things We Cannot Say. And it's kind of the book of my heart in a lot of ways, because it's the book that I worked on for the longest. I was thinking about it and working on it really for a decade. And there's a lot of my family in there, even though it's not directly their story. I mean, there's a contemporary plot line in that book that is about a woman who goes to Poland looking for her family history. And I went to Poland researching the book and looking for my family history. And, her situation is very different to mine, but lots of her emotions as she goes through that process are based on what I was feeling while I was writing the book. So it's a special book to me in a lot of different ways. So, I mean, they're all special. It's like having children. You're not actually allowed to pick a favorite, but if you are going to look for another one of my World War II books, I'd start there.
I think I'll be starting there, definitely. Sophie's asking, are you writing more World War II books?
Yes. The book that I'm working on now is... I'm not very good at very short, explanations about it, but it is about two women who are involved in the British Special Operations Executive spy program in France, and about the impact their decisions have on the next generation.
Simone's asking, I'm desperate to have 2 days to read your book. What histories of Australians descended from Germans, apart from your... I can't actually see the rest of that question, so we might see if Simone can come back. Oops. I think she's actually added a little bit down at the end. So I'll try and read it correctly. I'm desperate to have 2 days to read your book. What histories of Australians descendant from Germans, apart from your own oral histories, have helped you reflect on current Oz history?
That's a good question. I actually had a conversation with, I'm not sure exactly what her family heritage is, but an Australian author, Kim Kelly. I was talking to her early in the kind of brainstorming phase of this book, and we were talking about anti-Semitism, and that conversation led me to a whole bunch of thoughts and some resources that were really instrumental in writing this book. I have a feeling her family heritage might be German, but I think we are one of the strengths and one of the beautiful things about this country is that there are people of so many different family backgrounds, and we're all here in this sometimes tense but often mateship focused culture now, where we all bring something different, and it's one of the great things about our country. So I guess I'm probably inspired and informed by Australians of German heritage in a million ways I don't even realise.
Kelly, how would you have responded to German families coming across to America?
Oh, that's a really good question. So my book is about a group of German families that end up in Huntsville. 112 of them, 112 German men were ultimately worked out of Redstone Arsenal on the rocket program from around 1950. And the people who were there at the time had all of these different diverse responses to this influx of Germans. There was an obvious animosity. You know, some of these Americans had lost husbands or lost sons or lost neighbors in the war. And then there were the people who were downright suspicious, you know, that some of these men had been Nazis, and now they were living together in one central kind of block in Huntsville. They're all together. What was their real agenda? And then there was relief and welcoming and acceptance, because Huntsville had been slowly shrinking. Lots of the young people were moving away to look for work or to go to college. And so there was this other great big chunk of the Americans there who were just like, these men and women represent our best chance to save our town, which is ultimately what happened. So there was no kind of one response. And I think for me, I mean, my family was Polish. I don't think I would have been particularly welcoming to a group of German scientists that appeared in my town. So I can understand where people were coming from.
Jenny's saying, Kelly, is first person your preferred choice and why?
I love writing in first person because when I'm planning the book, when I'm daydreaming about the book, I'm trying to put myself into the character's head as much as I can. And I want it to feel immediate and very, very personal. So for me, first person gives me a chance. I could do that with third person as well. But for me, it's easier for me to write as the character. It might necessarily always be the voice that I choose, but till now it has always felt right.
Does your family, this is from Debbie, does your family ever visit your studio when you're writing? What do they think of you being an author?
I try to keep them away, Debbie. They're very distracting. This is why I'm out here and not in the house. They're too noisy and they want things all the time. I don't think when my son was really little, he used to tell people I was an orchestra. He didn't really understand what it is that I do for work. Every now and again, now that my books are published in Australia, it's always really cool for the kids to see them on shelves. And I'm so grateful for that. And every time, that if they're down the street with my husband and they go to the bookstore or someone else, they'll always send me a photo holding the book, like big, proud smiles on their faces. Like anything, there's times when balancing family and work it doesn't matter what your job is. There's always a challenge in that. But overall, I think, I actually think my son's nearly 13, and I think he could probably read this book. So at some point I'll make him read it and then he can get a different idea of what's taking me all these hours out here in my office.
Just as you were saying that, I was thinking, are your children great readers? Do they love to read?
Yeah.
And write? Do they have oh wow, so we've got some budding authors.
My son loves to tell me he was published in an anthology through that his school had when he was 9, and he'll often say, "How old were you when your first book was published?" Because I bet you were at 9. It wasn't 9.
Bit of a competition there. Love it.
Yeah.
Jody's saying, what authors do you read? There are so many good Aussie authors going around at the moment. On average, I read about 5 to 6 books a month, and I'm always looking for tips.
Yes, that's a really good question. I try, like I said, I try not to read historical fiction when I'm writing, but I love historical fiction. So I mentioned Kim Kelly before. She's a great Australian author. She's just so gifted and talented, and I'm a bit biased because she's a friend, but she has this amazing voice and this amazing way of capturing Australian history. I love reading outside of the genre though when I'm writing. So I love me a good rom-com. Oh, there's nothing better than like you're stressed, you're writing something hard, and then Beth O'Leary keeps you occupied for a couple of hours. Or, sorry, I love a good rom-com. I've really been getting into domestic suspense the last few years, and we've got Leanne Moriarty, the goddess, of course, Australian goddess, and then Sally Hepworth, who is also a friend. I'm quite biased again, but I'll read just about anything. The only things I can't really do, horror. And I don't have a brain that's well configured for crime. So I'll read proper crime if there's nothing else to read, but it's not my go-to because my imagination's too vivid. If someone's getting murdered, I'm seeing someone getting murdered, and that's not relaxing to me.
No,
So.
absolutely not. Helen's asking, at what stage would you have wished Sophie and Jürgen to take a stand?
I think that is a question for you, Helen. See, if we're assessing them through the eyes of people who know where their story ends, and that it's tricky, isn't it? I mean, was there a right point? They wonder about that in the book. I don't know if the answer is that clear cut, but I'd be interested to hear what other people think.
Helen's also saying she wants to congratulate you on this book as it really goes to the next level. I feel you presented both sides of the story fantastically well, that allowed readers to understand and appreciate difficult decisions for all involved. Can't wait to see what you have in store for us next.
Thank you, Helen. That's really kind.
It's lovely. Jenny's also saying, thanks, Kelly. Another one, what was your path to writing and ultimately being an author? What do you love most about the process?
I always wrote, even long before I was published. It was my hobby, long before anyone even knew that it was what I was doing for fun. I felt it was a bit audacious, actually, and in hindsight, it's really funny, especially now at this point when I write a book and it gets published. But for years, that was the dream. It was all I ever wanted to do with my life. I did other jobs, but the dream was always to be doing this. And so I wrote and wrote and wrote, and I think I estimated one day I probably wrote over 1 million words that were just practice words before I actually even really showed anyone my books or my stories. So it was a case of, and I didn't do any real formal training. I just read and wrote and read and wrote. And to this day, my favorite part of the process is still the way it feels to have a scene in my head and then to get it on paper and to feel like I've captured it. That is just the most astounding magic. I mean, I've kind of been entranced by that since I was a kid reading Heidi in my bedroom in Blacktown in Western Sydney. The fact that words could transport my consciousness, like that I get to do that for a job and I'm writing it and you guys are reading it. Oh, like that, there's nothing better in the world than that. I really feel like the luckiest fool in the world that I've bumbled my way into doing this for a job.
You know, what's interesting that you just said that we are reading it, but we're not just reading it, we're feeling it, because I was feeling a whole lot of things as I was reading both Lizzie's character, Henry, Sophie, Jürgen, the whole thing, and I felt Sophie's pain about two of her children. Lizzie sometimes frustrated me, but just because I felt that she couldn't see, but then I had to remember that she was seeing it from her point of view and from her brother's experiences and from what she knew. Lizzie, as I said, for me, Lizzie was a very interesting character. Sophie says, or is asking, when can we have your next book?
I should probably finish it first. And you really want me to edit it before you read it, trust me. My drafts are horrific. Hopefully next year.
And Jodie's asking, how did you come to be published? Was it immediate?
It was, but it was immediate after 2 decades of writing for fun. So, and I was published digitally in the UK first. And I was lucky enough that the first publisher that I submitted to picked up the book that I submitted to them. But, you know, people hear that and they think it doesn't always happen that way. That's certainly the case. It's very rare for it to happen that way. But I want to tell people that, because to me, being published seemed impossible for such a long time. And it certainly is hard. And there are conventions and you've got to do your research and know who you're submitting to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But sometimes it does happen. You know, it wasn't this long, arduous struggle for me. I probably would have kept going if it had been, you know, because you have to be prepared for anything. But sometimes it's the right publisher, the right story, and the right writer at the same time. And it just happens from there. But yeah, so but it is about doing the work before you're doing the submitting, though. I think that was a key factor in why it was easier.
Was there someone helping you along that journey? Like when you say doing the work before submitting, was there anyone reading it at all, or no? So
Kind of towards the end, I had a manuscript assessment done when I was in my early 20s of a book. And she said some nice things and gave me some, you know, critical feedback that I could implement. And I did that, and then put that manuscript aside and went on and wrote a whole bunch of other things and didn't show anyone that one for a long time. And then before I was actually published, I let a very small group of friends read the manuscript that ultimately became my first book. And they all said nice things. And the funny thing is, I thought, for me, I was very nervous about critical feedback. I really love writing so much. I did not know how I'd handle it. And in the end, what I discovered is that it's very hard to get your friends to tell you what's wrong with your book. And they only had nice things to say. And they really gave me quite a confidence boost, which is why I sought publication. But I think if I was doing it all again, I would find a writers group and I would get some proper critical feedback from my friends in the writers group or from my colleagues in the writers group. It's so important to learn how to take it. The first time I got an edit letter, it felt like someone was like ripping my soul in half, because I had no experience taking feedback. And, you know, eventually, you know, I sulked and I sooked and I digested it, and then I was able to implement it and it was all okay. And the book ended up much better for it. But it would have been better to come at that with a more professional approach. So find a writers group.
And it was your first book, so that's okay.
Oh yes, I'm sure it always hurts, but
yeah.
But
I'm sorry, I'm just looking at all the questions here. Kerry's asking, I saw this book in a bookshop and resisted buying it, but now feel I have missed out on reading an excellent book. Now I know I have to read all your books. Yes, Kerry, you do. She's a brilliant writer. Believe me. Greta's saying, Kelly, can I ask you a personal question? What star sign are you?
I'm an Aries. I'm not big on star signs, but I know that's what I am.
You're the same as my son.
Oh,
and I'm
I believe we're supposed to be stubborn. Is he stubborn?
Taurians are very stubborn, and I'm a Taurian.
Okay.
But we both have horns, so we lock horns. Although we're doing okay. We're doing okay at the moment. Jenny's saying you're an inspiration, Kelly. Thank you. I think this might be Sabine or Sabina. I cannot wait to read it. I love your books. I am German, living in Australia since 23 years. I am learning so much from your books. Wish I would have asked more questions to my grandparents.
Oh, me too. Yeah. Thank you.
And I think this must be Catherine. Did you deliberately target a UK audience rather than Australian audience first up?
For my first 4 books, they're all set in Australia. And they are very much, I wasn't really thinking about audience, to be honest. I was just, that first book I wrote just for myself. And I didn't really, you know, wasn't even really thinking about whether or not it was a good idea when I wrote it. It just was an idea that I had. And that was kind of how I operated then. I just would, in that case, I saw this amazing scene take place on a ferry, and I wrote that was the first scene of the book, and then I just daydream what might have happened to these characters through the next year or so of their life. So I wasn't really thinking about audience or setting in any mature way. I just I was at Sydney, so it's set at Sydney.
Maureen asking or saying, that was so brilliantly written, because during each woman's POV, I was thinking, if only these 2 women could sit down and talk. Creating empathy for each is amazing. Thanks.
Thank you. And that was really what I wanted to do, we live in a world that is increasingly polarized. And so how often do we have a conflict with someone forgetting that they have a whole background that we will never be privy to. So I tried to write these characters in a way that they're butting heads from the first time they meet, and they both have valid reasons to be angry with each other. But as we, the reader, get to know what they've been through, hopefully we can have a little bit more empathy for both of them. And that was exactly the point I was trying to make. If they met under different circumstances, or even if they sat down over a cup of tea and had a conversation, they could actually have been friends.
Yes, and they're both quite strong women, although very different women.
Yes.
Jodie's saying, not a question, but an observation. So appreciate your honesty and passion for your art.
Thank you.
Vilma's saying, this book sounds amazing. Can't wait to read it. Ike is saying, do you use Scrivener or just write in Word?
Yes, I dictate into Notepad, high technology there, and then I move it into Scrivener. Scrivener for me, because I plan quite extensively. So when I'm starting the book, I kind of know what the key points are and where each narrative's going. And so it's easy for me to write in Scrivener because I have them all set out, and I'm kind of just filling in the gaps as I expand the story.
And Sophie's saying, I won't say much because I don't want to spoil, but I just want to say thank you so much for Mayim and Adele. These were my faves. I have to say, Mayim was amazing. And yes, I don't want to say too much because I'll spoil it as well. But
I won't give it away, but there is a part of her story that was inspired by a real woman, Gerda Weissman-Klein, who I won't say what part, but I had a different, my story was going to unfold in a slightly different way. And then I came across Gerda in my research, and she was this incredible woman who ultimately ended up in the US and did a whole lot of work educating young people about democracy and how important it is. And I wanted to honor her in a way. So there's this one aspect to my story that was inspired by her. And Aunt Adele is inspired by my husband's late grandmother, who, although their stories aren't the same, their spirit very much is that stubborn, outspoken family matriarch that everyone's a little bit scared of, who's a little bit too blunt for her own good sometimes, someone who's not nice. My husband's grandmother, Barbara, was not nice at times because she would just tell you what she was thinking. And that for me is incredibly challenging because I've kind of feel like I'm living in a society where women are supposed to be nice all the time. But I loved her to bits, and I wanted to honor her with this character who is so much like her, just absolutely spine of steel and heart as big as the ocean, but also sometimes uncomfortably blunt. So that's Aunt Adele.
Aunt Adele was one of those women who, as you say, was perhaps on the surface not very nice, but a heart of gold underneath. Yeah. And she was, I thought the journey that she and Sophie took in the sense of where they started and where they ended up, yes, due to circumstances perhaps, but that was really lovely to see that change. And perhaps Adele always felt that way for Sophie, but she never verbalized it. It's hard to talk about things without giving away that I'm doing a whole lot of ums and ahs, and I'm thinking, I must be sounding silly. I'm just going to take us back a little bit in the sense that this book was a bit of an eye-opener in the sense that there's a perception that the Nazis introduced anti-Semitism, but in fact, it was there anyway. And you sort of touched on that, but was that important for you to show that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, because it comes back to this idea of it could never happen here. I mean, it wasn't polite to be anti-Semitic until the Nazis came to power, in some circles, but they were quickly able to tap into this undercurrent of hate and to flip the whole country, the whole region, the whole continent, the whole world on its head. So, it's about being, if you're going to be intolerant of anything, be intolerant of small acts of hate. And so I've tried to kind of write the book in such a way that the Nazis really didn't invent it. They just made it fashionable, So yes, that was really important to me. And I really hadn't thought about that too much until I started researching it. They are the big bad. Obviously, I'm certainly not saying there was anything redeeming about the Nazi Party, but they didn't invent the ideas that drove their decisions. They just use them to I don't know, to control Germany and yeah, they just tapped into what was already there.
And I think what was interesting is that we have that hatred of the Jews by the Nazis in Germany. Sophie, at the end of the war, comes to America and she sees another form of racism with the whites only, so that was very, very interesting to see. And was that deliberate? Did you do that
Well,
deliberately?
this actually really happened. I mean, these men and women were coming from a place that there were no Jew signs in the windows of the bakeries at one point, and then next thing you know, you're heading into a world war where there's a genocide against the Jews. Now they moved to America, where in the segregated South there really were whites only signs in the windows and no colored in some windows. And so I could only imagine how startling that would have been for these people who had seen the madness unfold. And then they're in America, and particularly, some of the American townspeople in Huntsville would have been quite haughty about, we don't want your kind here. I can only imagine how it would have felt to see that hypocrisy from people who were so accepting and benefiting from segregation. So it was important to paint the picture. It was important to me to paint the picture of that, because the parallels there would have been quite disconcerting.
And when Sophie speaks up and speaks her mind at an event, it's interesting again what that led to as well, in terms of her speaking up and then Lizzie taking umbrage. And so can you explain a little bit more about that? Can you talk a little bit more about?
Yes, well, I thought that the town of Huntsville must have felt a little bit like a tinderbox, because you have got segregation and now you've got these German families coming in. And as I said, there's all these different responses to this influx of Germans. And little do the people in Huntsville know, 80% of them were at one point members of the Nazi Party. I mean, they've been told no active members of the Nazi Party will be allowed to come here. And of course, that's what Truman had promised the American people. But people in the American government below Truman made a very different decision and whitewashed, for want of a better word, the histories of some of these men. And so you've got all of these different emotions and thoughts. And my story, what happens in Huntsville through this book, is an imagined account of what might have happened if just a little conflict, just a little spark had been thrown into that tinderbox. And so, of course, Lizzie's brother, Henry, I deliberately wrote Henry as they're very close. They grow up together on this farm and they're best friends. And he is the big brother who is, he's always looking after the family, and he's just a girl. Like, she's a girl who wants to be a farmer, and her family's always saying to her, girls don't become farmers, girls become farmers' wives, so she's limited by her gender from a very young age, and Henry's the protector. And of course, the Depression takes them in all kinds of different directions. And ultimately, Henry enlists and comes back from the war a very changed man. And so he actually, in a sense, is that spark.
Can I ask you to expand a little bit on Lizzie's relationship with her husband?
Yes.
Because it is an unusual relationship. And I'd love to hear why it went in that direction from you.
Yes, sure. Well, Lizzie is someone who has zero interest in a husband other than getting a farm. So from kind of the first few times that we meet her, she's thinking about marriage as a means to an end. She thinks, well, I want to be a farmer, and the only way I can do that is if I marry someone with a farm. But life doesn't pan out that way for her. And she has no romantic inclination at all, not towards men, not towards women. She just wants to be her own person, independent. If Lizzie were born now, she would have a very fabulously independent life on the land. But of course, the 30s is a really different world. And so Lizzie ultimately marries the man. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that she's not madly in love with him, even though they're very good friends. And that again was a deliberate choice. There are women like this, we don't realize how lucky we are that you don't have to get married anymore. But for a long time, that was really the only choice for women. And so I wanted to write Lizzie as someone that in 2022, I mean, she would have been winning the Rural Woman of the Year for her fabulous farm, where she would have pioneered all of these great agricultural techniques, but her choices were so limited. And so that's why I've written an atypical marriage for her.
I just want to say thank you very much Kelly, you've been amazing. You've given us
Thank
such
you.
insights in the book. I'm sure that everybody, well, I could just see all the comments here. Everyone's saying, wow, that's incredibly interesting. Thank you for an amazing
you,
books and
everybody.
bubbles. That's down to you. So just everyone's going, please bring Kelly back. I'm sure we will. And they're saying, love this book. So we're getting lots of
Thank
feedback.
you, everybody.
Thank you. So again, a very big thank you from me. And just in case you missed it earlier, you can purchase Kelly's book, The German Wife, from our event partner QBD. And if you do, you'll also get go into the draw to win the gourmet food hamper. It's valued at $2.49, and there's a link in the chat, so you'll be able to do that right now. Also coming up, there's another great event, so be sure to join us. That one is on Wednesday, the 29th of June, and we'll be talking to Shirley Burr, and it's about her book, Wake. That's a searing debut crime novel, which is
I've been hearing amazing things about that book. That sounds really good.
It does sound good. It's got me interested. It's all about grief and guilt surrounding an unsolved disappearance that still haunts a small farming community. And you'll be able to find out about that if you visit booksandbubbles.com.au and register for the event. And if you do, you'll also get the opportunity to sign up to the newsletter so that you're the first to find out about upcoming events and also to watch past events on demand. So a very, very, very big thank you from me and from all our attendees. They're still writing lovely comments. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Dora. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye. See you.